Hello, today I would like to do something that's slightly interactive and maybe is slightly less purposeful than other things. I think that um, I'd quite like to show off the kind of artistic side of processing in this video and think about how we can do something that's creative but not necessarily having a strict defined outcome. Um, and so as we kind of go through this, you'll kind of see what I mean, I think. So my first bit of code that I put in here is just setting up my window. So I've got my window set up here and I'm telling it a specific position on the screen to start at every time so that it always starts over here. And that's all this is doing. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to start looking at how we could make something look interactive or be interactive. And so we can use the built-in variables by processing called mouse X and mouse Y. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach these two variables that I'm using in my code, and with the aim that later on we might not use the mouse as an input, we might change this. So I'm going to say I'm going to make a float X and a float Y. I'm going to store that mouse X and that mouse Y here in those variables. I'm just going to print line X and Y. Ooh. And we should be able to see that we get some output. So you can see the numbers are changing there when I move the mouse around the screen. So that's clearly working. So let's not do print line, that's very boring. Let's draw ourselves a line. And so let's go from the top corner of the screen. So if I was to comment this out and play this, the top corner of the screen is 0, 0, top left. Okay, so if I do 0, 0 there, and then the last point of the line where I want to draw it, where I want the other point to end up at, is going to be at position X, Y. And so wherever our mouse is, we want that to be the end point. And this will give us an output a bit like this. So as I move my mouse around, ooh, look at that. Okay, that's it's pretty cool in its own way. But it doesn't look great. But I'm moving my mouse around and I'm kind of controlling this line, and things are starting to get a bit interesting. So let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's put a background on every time. So I'm going to say background, 255 for white. And now when I play this, instead of it having loads of lines, it will draw the background, then it will draw a line. Then it will draw the background over everything and then draw a line. And it will look like animation. Look. As I move my mouse around, my line gets longer. If I move my mouse further away, it gets shorter if I move it closer, and it changes angle depending on where my mouse is. So you can see that we have this line dynamically sizing to wherever our mouse is. Now let's add another line starting from this corner and coming down to our mouse pointer and see what we get. So instead of saying 0, 0, this time we're going to be width, because we want the whole width of our screen, no matter how big our screen is. I could put 700, but then if I decide to change the size of my screen, width will update with whatever I change up here. So it's good to use the variable name width. I'm going to keep it as 0y, and I'm going to draw the next point at x and y again. And so now this line, semicolon, as always, get ready for a lot of them. Now I've got two lines, and look, I'm kind of being able to make different triangles. Yay. So you can see there that these lines are responding to where my mouse is, and they are moving around and following it. So let's add two more lines into the other two corners, because I think that they're feeling a little bit left out. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it down here. So the first one is going to start at 0, x, but we want it to be at height in its y position. So height. And then the second one is going to be at width x, so all the way over here, but we want it to also be at height in the y position. So now we have 4 lines, and we are drawing them. Maybe I'll put in like top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right, just so you can see where each of these lines is coming from. Okay, so we've got our 4 lines there. Now if I hit play, look at that. Okay, so I've got a set of lines that's kind of following my mouse around, and incidentally, what happens if we get rid of the background? and go back to that how it was kind of being weird when we're drawing lines. Okay, so we get something that's quite interesting. So one thing that would make this better as we're moving our mouse around the screen and kind of filling it up is if we were to start thinking about manipulating the color. So first off, let's just think about the opacity of what we're doing. So we are drawing all of these lines with a stroke, and that stroke by default is set to 0. Ooh. Now, 0 stroke, you can either put 1 0 or 3 zeros, it will still be 0. But if we add a 4th 0 as well, that is the amount of alpha, and it's default drawn at 255 alpha. So if I press play, that's how opaque it is. Okay, that's how see-through or not see-through it is. And so 255, it is not see-through at all. If I drop this down to something like, I don't know, 50 and press play, you will notice that we have much fainter lines, and whenever I stop my mouse, the lines then get very thick because they all kind of pile on top of each other. And so this allows us to have a bit more dynamic range in what we're doing. And you can see the lines build up a lot more nicely and create a bit more depth to how we are moving our mouse around the screen. And it makes some really interesting kind of designs, actually. It looks quite, I don't know, it's very geometric because these are all kind of triangle-y shapes where they intersect. They, yeah, it's quite interesting. So let's take this one step further then and think about the colors that we're using. So at the moment we're just drawing it in black. Maybe what we could do is we could dynamically change the colors based on our position in the image. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a float for red, a float for green, and a float for blue. And we're going to put those in here. Now I'm going to say green is equal to 0 and blue is equal to 0 for now. And our red, we're going to do something interesting with. So we're going to use the map function. And the way map works is you give it a value. So I'm going to give it my X position here. Okay. And you tell it what two values X can go between. So what's its minimum value and what's its maximum value? Well, X on our screen is between 0 right over here and width right over here. So we're going to map this red colour from between 0 and width. And so we want to take that range of numbers and we want to apply it to another set of numbers. So this can currently go from between 0 and 700. Okay, but my color value can only go up to 255. So I can map that value to a value from between 0 and 255. And that will take whatever this is, 600, and it will proportionally scale it to within this range, which is really helpful. So now if I hit play, don't have a semicolon, of course. Now if I hit play, when I move my mouse around, you can see that as my X value increases, I get much more red, and as it decreases, I get much more black. Can you see that? Kind of fading through. So my X value now is dictating what color my lines are. And so up here, if I come up here into the corner, down here into the corner, still very red, and then down here is black, black. So you can see that we're starting to get not just opacity, but we're starting to get some color in here, which is also adding to the kind of interesting nature of this image. Now it's a little bit scruffy at the moment, but we're going to sort that out and kind of look at it more programmatically. But what I'd like to do first is think about how we could use map with green and blue as well. So the obvious thing to do for green would be to map our Y position to between 0 and height and keep 0 and 255. So Y can go from 0 right at the top to the height of the canvas, however high that is, which for us is 850. And we want the value that's within that range to be put within this range, because that's the range of colors that we can have. And now if I hit play, we should see that if I come up and to the left, very dark, up and to the right, very red, down and to the left, I'm very green, and down to the right, I've got this kind of yellow color where I'm mixing green and red. And in the middle, I'll have a kind of amalgamation of all of those colors. And so as I'm moving my mouse around the screen, I'm changing between the colors of the lines. So we've been neglecting blue, so I think maybe we should add in blue now. So blue will map again, but what we'll do this time is we will add together x and y, and we will map them from between 0 and width add height, because x add y, its maximum value could be the maximum width add the maximum height down here. And that's going to give us a color between 0 and 255. So now if we hit play on this, now we can get a full spectrum of colors as we move our mouse around the screen. So you can see white's in this corner, black's in this corner, so we're getting some interesting stuff happening now. It's kind of coming together, and we've now been able to completely control how much color is in the image based on the position that we're at. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to stop it from drawing. So when I get to a point that I'm happy with it, I'd like it just to stop. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a little function down here called mouse pressed. Now mouse press is a built-in function in processing which is triggered every time you press the mouse. And so I'm going to create a variable at the top, and let's make it a boolean, and we're going to say looping, and we're going to hold the state of whether we're looping or not. So we start looping, but if we press the mouse, so if we press the mouse, this code will run, and the code is going to say if we're looping, then clearly we want to stop looping. So I'm going to say no loop, and no loop is a way in processing that you can stop the draw loop from running. So all this code will stop running over and over again. And I'm going to say looping equals false. And then I'm going to just copy this. I'm going to say else, paste that. Else if not looping, I think I'm going to just do that, exclamation mark looping. Exclamation mark stands for not. I can say loop, and I can say looping equals true. So let's give that a whirl. So here I can click and it is stopped and it's not following my mouse around anymore, and I can click again and it's now following my mouse around. So that little exclamation mark there is the same as me saying else if looping equals false. It's just a shorthand. And the same here, if looping, I could say if looping equals true, but it just makes my code a bit more easier to read. So if looping, that makes sense, and if not looping, then loop. And now we've got a little way of being able to click the mouse and pause what we're doing, or we can start it again. And so this just starts and stops our animation, which can be used in loads of different ways for loads of different projects, and is quite a nice little feature to have in your toolkit. Now once it starts and I'm just moving my mouse around, it's just not looking very good. I'm not able to kind of move my mouse to create anything particularly impressive. But we can program the computer to do something impressive. Now you might enjoy this, you might think this is cool, and absolutely fine, go for it. Also you could think about dropping the alpha down even more as well, and kind of really building it up slowly, and you could really have some fun with this in terms of how you can layer this and get these different patterns to emerge. But what I would like to do is use some programming to actually make these patterns a bit more interesting. And to do that, what I'd like to do is I would like to wrap all of this up and put it into its own function first. So this whole thing here can just be cut, and we're going to put it in its function down here. We're going to say void draw lines. And I'm going to put all of this in draw lines, because my red, green and blue color picking, they just take an X and a Y value, and then I'm just using that X and the Y to draw the different lines. So I just need to pass them into my thing. So I'm going to say a float X and a float Y for draw lines, and then up here in the draw loop I can just say draw lines, and I can pass in that X and that Y here. They'll be passed into here, and they can be used to draw these lines and to work out these colors. So you should notice now when I hit play, missing a semicolon of course, but you should notice that when I hit play, I and now still back, still doing exactly the same thing, but I've just made my draw loop a lot cleaner, which is nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate the X and the Y values using programming rather than my kind of clunky human input. So let's stop that. Well, no, let's just keep it there. So what I'd like to do is think about how I could get it just to move by itself. So instead of saying X is equal to mouse X, let's get rid of that, let's get rid of that. Let's actually set these variables up the top. I don't want to set them every time, I don't want to refresh them every time in the loop. I want to set them once at the top and then I want to update them in the loop. So I'm going to say float X, float Y. When we set up, I'm going to give X and Y a value. So I'm going to say X is equal to something and Y is equal to something. Now I want it to start at the top middle here. Okay, that's where I want it to start. So that would be width over 2. So if we divide the width by 2, we get the middle position of the canvas, and Y would be 0 because it's at the top of the canvas. And so when I draw lines X and Y, if I hit play now, it's not going to draw at my mouse position, it's just drawing at that position. Now that's no good, we need it to move as well. So I'm going to get my Y value and I'm going to minus equals 0.1. No, I'm going to plus equals. I always get it run the wrong way. I'm going to add 0.1, maybe that's a bit slow, add 1. And okay, so now we've got something that is moving in a very predetermined, a very structured way. Okay, going from the top to the bottom. And you can see as it makes its way to the bottom, it's just going to carry on going down and down and down forever. So we need to catch that. So I'm going to say if my Y position is greater than height, then I need to do something. Well, I probably need to tell my program what direction I'm in. So I'm going to need to get a maybe a string called direction, and I'm going to set that equal to down to begin with. So we're going to be going down to begin with. And I'm going to say up here, if direction equals down, then I'm going to add 1 to my Y position. And actually, saying add 1 probably isn't great. Let's do line speed equals 1. Float, because we can make it smaller later. So let's take our line speed and let's pop it down here. So Y plus equals line speed. So if our direction is down, we're going to add to our Y. Now if our Y becomes greater than height, we're going to change the direction of where Y is, of where our kind of line is being drawn from. So let's say we started here, let's move it across to here. So it's going to come down to here, and now we want it to jump over to here and start moving this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to go to what's that, height over 2 and width. So I'm going to say Y equals height over 2, X equals width, and our direction is equal to left, because we're going to start at the right and we're going to be moving left towards the left side, just like we started at the top here and we moved down. So now up here I'm going to say else if direction equals left, and I'm going to put in my brackets around my condition. If my direction equals left, then what am I going to do? Well, my X position is going to get smaller, so it's going to minus equals line speed. And I need to check now. My X is going to keep going along here, blub, 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 all the way until it gets to 0. And then I need to make sure that once it gets to 0, it then changes again. So I'm going to say in a separate if X is less than 0, then I want to move again. So we're going to do the same kind of thing as we did in here, but we're going to have different values. So Y, if we're over here, we're going to put it down in the middle now. So we're going to put Y as height and X as width over 2. So it's going to come down the full height and in the middle, and then direction is going to equal up. Now if our direction equals up, so else if direction equals up, you can see how this is like really coming along nicely in terms of programming this quite naturally. So if we're going up, then our Y position is going to get smaller by line speed. So line speed, And finally, we need to check whether our y position is less than 0. So we need to do, I don't think, I said finally, but I don't think that is finally. If y is less than 0, then we're going to say that same kind of thing here. But we've done down, we've done left, we've done up, so we need to go right now. So we're going to go right. And in order to go right, we need to be at y height over 2. Yep, absolutely. But x doesn't want to be width, it wants to be 0, starting over here. So we're going to put 0 here. And we're going to then be going in the right-hand direction. Now, else if direction equals, let's copy all of this. Actually, let's copy all of this. It's a bit lazy, but that's fine. Else if direction equals right, then x is going to plus equals line speed. Don't forget my curly bracket. And so now we're checking for all different directions, down, left, up, and right. And we are modifying the particular coordinate that we want to, the x or the y, by a positive or negative amount of line speed. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're just going to check for whether x is greater than width. So if x is less than 0, else if x is greater than width, then we are going to do a similar thing here, but we are going to, instead of y being height and x being width over 2, we're going to start back at the top, right where we started at the beginning, 0, and our direction will now be down. So we'll now be going downwards. And so this should create a kind of nice looping effect that allows this picture to build up over time. So let's have a little look and see how it looks. Hopefully I've written this with enough semicolons and hopefully it kind of makes sense to you. Let's have a look and see it in action. So you can see it should come down here, and then once it hits the bottom, it should snap over to the right hand side. Here we go. Yep, okay, great. We programmed it. We programmed it well. That's always a relief. And now you can see it's coming over, and once we hit this side, it should then start at the bottom and go upwards. Yep, lovely. So we've gone to the bottom and we're going upwards. And then once we've gone to the top here, I think we're going to go to the left and go out to the right. Yeah, so off to the left and out to the right. And you can see that this is slowly building up. Because we've used this really low amount of alpha, just 10 alpha in our lines, we're actually getting this really nice kind of blending where every time we go over these, we're getting more and more deep colours. These colours are kind of combining together, and we're getting these kind of rich, interesting things slowly coming out of the woodwork and slowly kind of allowing us to see not just what was most recently drawn, but back through to what has been drawn previously, which is quite interesting. And there we have it. So you can experiment with different speeds. So maybe if I did line speed 10, played that, okay, that gives a whole different look. Wow, that is actually flying through. Okay, cool. So you can see that's actually really cool. I in my practice one, I did 0.1. It takes ages, but I'd really recommend giving it a go, because the final result is really nice, really cool, and it's quite a calming animation to be looking at. But now that I've just done 10, I'm tempted to try like 30 or something and see these really kind of big geometric shapes kind of appear. Okay, one thing I would like to do is control the alpha from up here as well. So I'm just going to say float alpha, and I'm going to set that equal to 30 as well. And then down here, I'm just going to, in my draw lines, when I put in my stroke, I'm going to just put in my alpha. Yeah, look at this. This is cool. With 30 alpha, does that change much? Just a little bit more broad. You can see how quick it is with 30 as well. It's absolutely zipping across. So that's building a somewhat interesting pattern. Now, I'm just going to drop the line speed down to maybe 5. Okay, that's pretty sweet. Now what I'd like to do, just very last thing, I'd like to think about how I could add a little bit of randomness, just a little bit of randomness to this. So what I'd like to do is every time I go through this draw loop, I'd like to pick a random number. So float r equals random from between 0 and 1. No, it's from between -1 and 1. And I would like to just add that to my line speed. So line speed equals plus equals r. And so add on that negative or positive number. And this should, oh, look at this. This is awesome. This is really cool. Okay, I'm gonna, what I'm doing now is probably gonna make this a whole lot less satisfying, but it's a little experiment just to see if we can, there's like these circular shapes coming out here. That's really cool. I'm really digging this. It's so nice to be able to play with these numbers and kind of see what makes an interesting pattern. And you could also play with the colors as well. Like I'm using RGB, but you could just stick with the red or a red and green spectrum, and maybe you'd get more detail. You'd definitely see more of the range of colors there rather than having the blues muddled in as well. But let's just have a look and add in a little bit of randomness and see if this creates anything interesting. Line speed plus equals r. Line speed I put with a capital S. Okay, so it's just kind of changing the speed with which it's drawing. So it's not doing what I expected it to do. But what I do want it to do is actually, let's keep that random number, but I'm just going to pick a random number between 0 and 1, a random floating point number, so any decimal number between 0 and 1. And what I'd like it to do is if that r is less than, if r is less than 0.1, I'd like it to pick another random number float r2 equals random between 0 and 1, and if that r2 is less than 0.5, then I'm going to modify x, else I'm going to modify y. So I'm going to add on a little bit of randomness. So I'm going to say, actually I could do this all in one. So I could say, no, I'm going to say float addition equals random -1 to 1. And we're going to add that addition to x and to y. So what have I done here? I have picked a random number between 0 and 1, and it can be any decimal number between 0 and 1. So there is a 90% chance that it won't be less than 0.1. If it's a random number, there's a 90% chance that it won't be less than 0.1. There is a 10% chance that it will be less than 0.1, and if it is that, remember we're going to pick this 60 times a second, so there'll be lots of chances for it to be under that. If it is that, we're going to pick another random number, and we're going to have a 50-50 chance this time. If it's less than 0.5, we're going to change the x position, and if it's greater than 0.5, we're going to change the y position. And we're going to add on a little bit of randomness to that, just to start throwing things off and maybe seeing if something interesting can come out of this randomness. Okay, I think doing between -1 and -10 probably isn't gonna do much. So let's do -20 and 20. Let's see what that does. Okay, you can see that it's having a fairly big effect here. Okay, yeah, so you can see that it's kind of getting a bit drunk now and going off to one side, and it's kind of not drawing it in that satisfying pattern. There's still some structure to it from what it's doing, but it is just like it's broken. I uh I thought maybe the randomness might give us a bit more of an enjoyable outcome, should we say? But actually, it just looks a little bit messy. What happens if I do make these much bigger? Do we get anything interesting happening? So every time it hits an edge, it resets, and so it is kind of being constrained within a certain range. It can only get so far away before it then resets. Yeah, I quite like this. I think if we were to change the speed of this right down to zero point 0.1, and we were to just watch this, oh my lord. Okay, this is really interesting because I've got such a slow speed and such a big random number that it can jump to. There is a chance that it could just never get to the other side now. Because it's moving so slowly, it could get almost there and then jump 50 pixels back, which would be what, zero point 0.1 times 10 would be 1. So that's like 500 times back. So it yeah, this probably isn't going to work so great, but it's quite interesting. It's kind of jumping there. Oh, that's the other thing, I guess. It could jump 50 steps ahead and then it could hit. And so I guess it's got a fair chance of getting there. So I'm going to leave it here. Feel free to tweak, think about randomness, think about how you can make this pattern kind of do something unexpected or always change every time you run it, and think about how you could change the alpha, the line speed, the colors that you're using in your draw lines in order to make this an interesting animation. Now, I'm going to get rid of this. I'm just going to comment this out, and in fact, let's just comment this and this out, and watch it draw a nice slow. I would really recommend give zero point 0.1 line speed a go and just watch it draw itself. It's very satisfying. So until next time, enjoy coding and thanks for watching. Sweet.